Her parents just told the world what they've been thinking for 2 months. And once you hear what Dan and Kathy Shepard said about their daughter, about the night she disappeared, and about Brian Hooker, you're going to understand why federal investigators believe this is murder and not an accident. You're going to understand why the Coast Guard came back. You're going to understand why the story Brian has been telling doesn't survive contact with the people who actually knew Lynette. I'm going to walk you through 5 revelations that Dan and Kathy made public just days ago. 5 things that her parents said that completely change how you understand what happened in the Bahamas on April 4th. And by the time we're done, you're going to see why every single version of Brian's story collapses when you stack it against what her family knows to be true. My name is Crimitage, and this is what her parents revealed. First, let me tell you who Dan and Kathy Shepard are, because it matters. It matters a lot. Dan Shepard is Lynette's father. He's been waiting 2 months. 2 months of not knowing. 2 months of hoping that investigators would find her. 2 months of wondering if the Coast Guard would bring her home. 2 months of delayed and prolonged grief. That's what Kathy called it. Not regular grief, not the kind where someone dies and you have a funeral and you get to say goodbye, but the kind where your loved one is just gone and you don't get a body, you don't get closure, you don't get to bury them or say your final words. You just get 2 months of waiting. Kathy is Lynette's stepmother. And I want to be clear about something. Stepmother doesn't mean less than. Stepmother doesn't mean she didn't love Lynette with everything she had. Kathy loved Lynette. She supported her. She was there for her. And she's been living in that delayed and prolonged grief right alongside Dan. These are not people who are looking for attention. These are not people who wanted to sit in front of a camera and tell their story. They're private people. They work. They mind their own business. They live their lives. But after 2 months of uncertainty, after watching their daughter's husband disappear instead of helping to find her, after seeing him pop up in Michigan, shopping at malls in Oregon visiting his son, after 8 weeks of complete silence from Brian, they decided something. They decided the story he told doesn't match the person they knew, and so they spoke. And what they said is going to change how investigators think about this case. So let's talk about revelation number 1, and I want you to really sit with this because it's the foundation for everything else. Lynette was not just a swimmer. She was not someone who liked the water. She was not someone who took a vacation and went swimming. According to Dan, according to the person who watched her grow up, according to her father, Lynette was a kind of swimmer that most people could never be. Not in their wildest dreams. She would swim out into a lake, 1 mile, 1 full mile out into open water, and then she would turn around, and she would swim a mile back, not as a challenge, not as some big accomplishment she had to prepare for, regularly, like it was nothing, like she was just going for a casual jog, except in water. Dan told a story about watching her in a track meet when she was younger. This was organized. This was competitive. They lined up the girls on one side. They lined up the boys on the other side. Starting line, finish line. They fired the gun. And when everyone got to the end, Lynette had beaten all of them. Not just the girls. The boys. All of them. This was an athlete. This was someone whose relationship with her body was not casual. This was someone whose relationship with physical exertion was trained. She understood how to push. She understood how to sustain effort. She understood endurance. She was 55 years old when she disappeared, and she was still capable of things that would terrify most people. And this is the thing that breaks Brian's story into pieces. Because what did he say happened? He said she fell out of the dinghy. He said the water was rough. He said the current was strong. He said the tide pulled her away. He said the waves were too big. He said she couldn't make it back. He said she was helpless. He said this to investigators. He said this to friends. He said this to the media. He said this to her family. He told this story over and over and over. Different words sometimes, different versions sometimes, but the core narrative was always the same. Lynette went overboard in rough water, and she couldn't survive it. But according to the people who knew her, according to the people who watched her train, according to her family, Lynette was capable of things that defy that narrative. So when Brian says she couldn't swim 30 yards to reach safety, when he says she couldn't make it to shore that was close enough to see from where she fell, when he describes her as helpless against the ocean, the people who knew her best, the people who watched her beat boys in a race, the people who knew she could swim a mile in open water, don't recognize the woman he's talking about. That woman doesn't exist. The woman they knew was strong. The woman they knew was capable. The woman they knew was a mile swimmer. That's revelation number 1. Revelation number 2 is about the water itself, and I need you to understand how critical this is. Because the place where Brian says Lynette went overboard wasn't rough ocean. It wasn't treacherous. It wasn't dangerous. It was shallow. Dan and Kathy have been there. They've boated through those exact same waters. They've seen it with their own eyes. They know what they're talking about. According to Dan, the water where Lynette supposedly fell into the dinghy was only 2 to 4 feet deep. 2 to 4 feet, that's not drowning water. That's not dangerous water. That's wading water. That's water where a person of average height can stand up with their head above the surface. That's water where you can literally just stand there. And she wasn't even in the deepest part of that shallow area. She was in a spot that was only 30 yards from water that was 2 feet deep. 30 yards from water where she could stand. And from there, from that 2-foot water, it was just a few more yards to shore. So Brian is telling investigators that rough water pulled her away, that the conditions were too dangerous, that she was helpless against the ocean, that she couldn't make it back. But Dan and Kathy look at the actual water, and they see something very different. They see water where their daughter, a mile swimmer, a woman who could beat boys in a foot race, could have easily made it to safety, could have easily stood up, could have easily waded to shore. But here's the thing that really matters. Here's the thing that actually changes everything. Dan remembers the weather that day. He and Kathy have looked at the photographs. They have watched the time-stamped video from that exact time on that exact date. And the water wasn't rough. The water was calm. There were no waves. None. 2 to 4 foot waves are serious. 2 to 4 foot waves are big. 2 to 4 foot waves are the kind of thing that could genuinely be dangerous to a small boat. But the water on April 4th was not rough. It was calm. So when Brian describes big waves and rough conditions and water that's too dangerous for a 55-year-old woman to survive, when he paints a picture of an accident caused by rough seas and powerful currents, the evidence doesn't match. The water was calm. The depth was shallow. The distance to safety was short. And Lynette was a mile swimmer. The physics of his story don't work. That's revelation number 2. Revelation number 3 is the one that Dan didn't even know about until recently, and when he learned it, things started to make sense in a different way. In March 2026, before the trip to the Bahamas, before she disappeared, Lynette purchased a plane ticket home to Michigan. She was planning to leave. Think about that for a second. 2 months before she vanished into the water, she was already making arrangements to get away. She was already booking her escape. She was already saying to herself, I need to get out of this. And when Dan was asked about this, when he was asked if Lynette seemed like she was trying to escape her marriage, a picture emerged of a woman in crisis, a woman who was drowning, not in water, in her relationship. Carly, Lynette's daughter, had confided in her grandfather. She told him something that nobody else was saying openly. She told him that whenever she and Brian drank, things got ugly. The drinking didn't make them closer. The drinking didn't help them bond. The drinking triggered Brian's worst behavior. When they drank, he would get mean. When they drank, he would want to argue. When they drank, the relationship would spiral into something that looked like abuse. So at one point, Lynette and Brian told Dan and Kathy something. They told them they had quit drinking. They said they were taking a break from alcohol. They said they were trying to fix things. They said they were trying to make it work, and Dan and Kathy believed them. But then they came to visit again, and they were drinking. And Kathy looked at Lynette and said, I thought you quit drinking. And Lynette said, we've gone back to it. That's when Kathy knew. That's the moment she understood. That's when she said to herself, oh no, here are problems. Because the pattern hadn't changed. The drinking was back. The arguments were back. The ugliness was back. But worse than that, Lynette had already bought a plane ticket for March. She had already made the decision. She had already arranged her escape. What changed her mind? What made her cancel that ticket? Did she believe Brian when he said things would get better? Did she think the trip to the Bahamas would fix things? Did she have hope that something could change? Dan doesn't know. He'll probably never know. But what he does know is something specific. 3 days before she disappeared, Lynette seemed happy. She and Brian had gone to the coast just before the Bahamas trip. They were together, and she seemed content. She seemed excited about the vacation. She sent Dan videos of herself scuba diving, the ocean, the fish, the life underneath the surface. She seemed genuinely happy in those videos, but that underlying problem didn't disappear, just because she seemed happy for a moment. The drinking pattern was still there. The argument pattern was still there. The marriage that Dan could see was still troubled. It was just being smashed by a vacation. And then 3 days after they arrived in the Bahamas, she was in the water. 3 days. From seeming happy and excited about her vacation to missing in shallow water that supposedly had dangerous waves, except there were no waves. Dan thinks about that sometimes. About how fragile it was. About how quickly things must have gone wrong. That's revelation number 3. She had a way out. She had purchased a ticket home, but she didn't take it, and 2 weeks later, she was in the water. Revelation number 4 is about Brian's own family, and this is where things start to get really dark. Brian Hooker has a son in Oregon. His name is Jacob Hooker, except Jacob Hooker doesn't use that last name anymore. He rejected it. He looked at the name Hooker, the name his father gave him, the name that connects him to his father, and he said no. I don't want this. I don't want to be associated with this. I'm changing my name. His new name is Jacob Pellegrini. Think about what that means. Brian's own flesh and blood son looked at his father's identity and said, I want nothing to do with that. I want nothing to do with being a hooker. When I raise my own children, they won't be hookers. They won't carry this name. They won't be connected to this man. And there's a reason for that. Jacob's mother was Elizabeth, Brian's former partner, the woman who had his children, and Elizabeth hated Brian. Before she died of cancer, Elizabeth hated Brian so much that she told anybody who would listen. She didn't whisper it in private conversations. She shared it openly. She made sure her children knew it. She made sure the family understood how she felt about him. She hated him. And when Elizabeth died, when cancer took her, Jacob was left with that message. His mother hated his father so much that even facing death, she didn't make peace with him. She didn't try to reconcile, she just kept saying, "I hate him." And so Jacob, when he became old enough to make his own choices, when he became old enough to decide his own identity, he said, "I'm not going to be a hooker. I'm going to be a pedigree. I'm going to distance myself from that man. I'm going to make sure my children don't carry his name. I'm going to make sure they're not associated with whatever he represents." Now Jacob is a stay-at-home dad in Oregon. He's got children of his own, and those children will grow up with a different last name. They will grow up not being hookers. They will grow up not being connected to their grandfather's identity. And that's significant. That's really significant, because it tells you something about Brian's ability to maintain relationships with the people closest to him. His own son rejected his name. His former partner hated him with enough intensity that she shared it with everyone around her, including her children. His ex-partner was so adamant about her feelings that even cancer couldn't soften her toward him. This is not a man who people close to him feel good about. This is not a man who inspires love in the people who know him best. This is a man whose own family tried to distance themselves from him, and then he married Lynette. And within a decade, her daughter was questioning what happened to her mother. Her parents were telling the world that his story doesn't make sense. Her family was gathering DNA samples for identification, and he was fleeing to different states, hiding from cameras, avoiding contact with the family she left behind. That's revelation number 4. His own son changed his name. His former partner hated him so much that she shared it even facing death. His own blood rejected his identity. Revelation number 5 is about the silence, and I need you to understand what this silence means. For 8 weeks after Lynette disappeared into the Bahamas, Brian Hooker did not call his stepdaughter Carly. Not once. 8 weeks! 56 days. More than 1,300 hours. And not one phone call. Carly is a woman who he raised. She came into his life when she was a young child. He's been her father in every way except biology. He's the man who shaped her. He's the man who was there for her growing up. He's the man she called Dad. And for 8 weeks, he didn't pick up the phone. Think about what that says. If you lose a spouse, if your wife disappears into the ocean, if you're devastated by what happened, you reach out. You call the people who loved her. You talk to the family. You share your grief. You bond over what you've lost. You try to comfort each other. You try to support each other through the trauma. You don't go 8 weeks without speaking to the stepdaughter you raised, unless the grief isn't real, unless the devastation is performed, unless you're avoiding contact because contact might require explanation. Dan said something that stuck with me. He said, "If Brian was innocent, I think I would have heard from him more than the one time on Easter that he called to tell me what happened. Easter, one phone call. And what did he sound like? Monotone, relaxed, casual. Like he was relaying a news story instead of describing the disappearance of his wife. Not frantic, not desperate, not broken. Monotone and relaxed. And then nothing. No follow-up. No checking in. No asking Dan and Kathy if they needed anything. No offering to help with the search. No asking what they'd heard from investigators. No messages, no texts, no calls, just silence. For 8 weeks, Brian went to Sacramento. He said he needed to be with his terminally ill mother. But then he went to Oregon. Why Oregon? To visit his son. The son who changed his name to escape association with him. the son who probably doesn't want much contact with him. And then he went to Michigan. He was spotted at a shopping mall with his daughter Rosie. But he didn't go see Carly. He didn't reach out to Lynette's family. He just wandered around shopping malls. And he hired federal lawyers. He changed his legal representation. He went from a state attorney to someone with DOJ prosecution experience, someone who handles federal cases, someone who understands what it looks like when the federal government is building toward an indictment. But he never called Carly, and Dan pointed out something else, something that keeps coming back. Carly hasn't heard a word from him in 8 weeks, not a text, not a call, not a message through social media, not a single word. But if he was innocent, wouldn't you expect him to reach out? Wouldn't you expect him to try to maintain some kind of connection with the family of the woman he loved? Wouldn't you expect him to check in on the people who are suffering? That's what an innocent man does. That's what someone actually in grief does. That's what someone who actually cares about the family does. But Brian didn't do any of that. He just disappeared. And the silence is louder than any excuse could ever be. That's revelation number 5. 8 weeks. No contact, no calls, no messages. Just absence. Now let me tell you what all 5 of these revelations mean when you stack them together, because when you do, the picture becomes very clear. They mean that Brian's story about an accident, about rough water, about helplessness, about a tragedy beyond his control doesn't match the person Lynette was. She was a swimmer, she was strong, she was capable, she was the kind of person who could handle situations that would break normal people. The water was calm, the depth was shallow, the distance to safety was short. She was planning to leave him in March. She had a ticket home. Something made her stay, but her doubts about the marriage were real. They were serious, they were important. His own son changed his name to escape association with him. His former partner hated him so much that she shared it with everyone. His own blood rejected his identity, and when she disappeared, he went silent. Not grieving, not reaching out, not searching, not comforting the people who loved her, just absent. When you look at all 5 pieces of evidence that her parents revealed, they don't point to an accident. They don't point to rough water and helplessness. They don't point to tragedy beyond anyone's control. They point to a man whose own family rejected him, a man whose wife was planning an escape, a man who told investigators a story about rough water and helplessness that doesn't match the capable swimmer her family knew. A man who, when confronted with her disappearance, didn't reach out to her family, didn't call her daughter, didn't check in on her parents, didn't offer to help, didn't grieve. They point to someone who knew what he was doing, someone who planned it, someone who lied about every detail, someone whose own family rejected him because they knew who he really was. And here's what's important to understand, that Dan and Kathy didn't have to go public. They could have stayed quiet. They could have let the investigators do their work in silence. They could have retreated into their grief and waited for answers. They're private people living through an unimaginable nightmare. But they did it because the official narrative isn't matching reality. Because their daughter's husband is walking free. Because he's in Michigan shopping at malls. Because he's in Oregon visiting his son. Because he's hiring federal lawyers and preparing for prosecution. And their daughter is still missing. Their daughter, the mile swimmer, is still missing in shallow water, where the current supposedly pulled her away on a day when the water was calm. Their daughter, the woman who could beat boys in a race and swim a mile in open water, is dead, and the man who put her there is shopping at malls. So Dan and Kathy decided to tell the story, to tell the world who their daughter really was, to challenge the narrative that Brian has been building, to put on the record what they know to be true. And in doing so, they've given investigators something they didn't have before. The testimony of people who knew Lynette, who knew her capabilities, who knew her doubts about the marriage, who knew that the story about rough water doesn't match the woman they loved. That's powerful evidence, because juries don't just listen to defendants and their lawyers. They listen to the people who knew the victim. They listen to family members. They listen to character witnesses. They listen to parents describing their daughter. And what Dan and Kathy have done is provide character evidence that contradicts every major element of Brian's story. She was capable. The water was calm. She was planning to leave. His own family rejected him. He went silent. 5 revelations from her parents that destroy his story. I want to be clear about something though, because this is important. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He has not been convicted of anything. He denies all wrongdoing. His attorneys say he did not harm his wife. All individuals are presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law. That's the law. That's the system. What I've laid out for you is what Dan and Kathy revealed and what that evidence suggests when you examine it carefully. This is not proof. This is not a conviction. This is what the people who loved Lynette said about her, about Brian, and about the night she disappeared. But I will say this, and I want you to really hear this. If the investigators are paying attention, if the Coast Guard is building a case, if the federal prosecutors are reviewing the evidence, then what Dan and Kathy said matters. It matters because they know Lynette better than anyone except maybe Carly. They know she was a mile swimmer. They know the water was calm. They know she was planning to leave. They know Brian's family rejected him. They know he went silent. And they know that those 5 facts don't point to an accident. They point to something deliberate, something calculated, something that took a father and a mother to buy plane tickets to the Bahamas, something that made them walk shorelines with cadaver dogs, something that made them wait 2 months for answers, something that made them finally accept that investigators were probably looking for remains instead of their daughter. That's what they know. And now, so do you. If you have any information about April 4th in the Bahamas, about what happened that night, about anything that could help investigators, contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force at 2423224444. Or go to tipstuffbi.gov and submit an anonymous tip, or download the CGS app and report what you know anonymously. Both investigations are still active. The Coast Guard is still searching, and Dan and Kathy are still waiting. Subscribe if you're following this case. I'm going to bring you every update as this investigation unfolds because this case is far from over. Thank you for watching.